"Dad, I have terminal cancer and only 3 months to live," my son Daniel told me, crying over the phone. He was begging for $50,000 for a treatment that, according to him, was his only hope. I gave him all my savings without hesitation, but when I went to the hospital to visit him, the doctor told me something that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Miller, your son has never been a patient of ours." In that moment, I understood that the greatest betrayal of my life came from the person I loved the most. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Richard Miller. I'm 65 years old. And for my entire life, I believed I had raised an honest and honorable son. I worked as a civil engineer for 40 years, building bridges and highways across the country, always thinking about my family's future. My wife Linda and I sacrificed for decades to give our son Daniel the best education possible. We paid for private universities, language courses, and we even bought him his first apartment when he graduated. I thought I had done everything right as a father, but on the morning of March 15th, 2024, when my phone rang at 7:30, my world completely fell apart. It was Daniel, my only son, crying in a way I had never heard before. His voice was broken, desperate, and between sobs he told me the words every parent dreads to hear. "Dad, I have something very serious to tell you. The doctors diagnosed me with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I only have 3 months to live." My heart stopped. I literally felt as if someone had stabbed me in the chest. Linda, who was making breakfast, dropped her coffee cup on the floor when she saw my expression. "What's wrong, Richard?" she asked, alarmed. But I couldn't speak. I could only listen to my son sobbing on the other end of the line, telling me details that shattered my soul. "The tumor is very aggressive, Dad. The doctors at University General Hospital told me that traditional chemotherapy won't work in my case. There's an experimental treatment at a private clinic in California that could save my life, but it costs $50,000 and I don't have that kind of money. Without this treatment, I'll be dead before summer." As Daniel spoke, I was taking mental notes of every detail. As an engineer, I've always been meticulous, and something inside me told me I had to pay attention to every word. He mentioned specific names. Dr. Michael Evans as his main oncologist. He talked about elevated CA-19-9 tumor marker levels and described symptoms like severe abdominal pain and a 30-pound weight loss in 2 months. "Son, calm down," I said, even though my own voice was trembling. "We're going to get that money. Your mother and I will do whatever it takes. When do you need the payment to start the treatment?" "In a week, Dad. Dr. Evans says that every day that passes without starting reduces my chances of survival. I know it's a lot of money, but it's my only chance to live. I don't want to die, Dad. I have so many plans, so many things I still want to do." After hanging up, I hugged Linda while she cried inconsolably. "We'll sell the car, Richard. We'll use all of our savings. It's our son," she said through her tears. I nodded, but a small voice inside me whispered that something didn't quite add up. It wasn't a lack of trust in Daniel, but the paternal instinct of a man who had lived 65 years and had learned to read between the lines. That same afternoon, as we were organizing our finances, I remembered a conversation I'd had with my friend Tom Peterson, who is an oncologist at City Central Hospital. I decided to call him, not to betray my son's trust, but to better understand the disease and be able to support him in the most effective way possible. "Tom, I need you to explain pancreatic cancer to me. My son was just diagnosed and I'm desperate," I said when he answered the phone. Tom explained a lot of technical things, but when I mentioned the specific details Daniel had shared, I noticed a slight pause. "Richard, CA-19-9 markers aren't used for an initial diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and the experimental treatments you're describing don't exist in California with those characteristics. Also, such a specific diagnosis requires multiple studies that take weeks. It's not given in a single consultation." I hung up the phone with a strange feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to think badly of my son, but the technical details didn't match what Tom had explained. However, I decided it didn't matter. If there was even the slightest possibility that Daniel was telling the truth, I couldn't risk losing my only son by being too suspicious. That night, while Linda slept restlessly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing for what was to come. If my son needed $50,000 to live, he would have it. But I would also prepare myself to observe every detail of this situation, because something in my father's heart told me that this story was just beginning. The next day, I decided to call Tom again to dig deeper into my doubts. This time I was more direct with my questions, though without fully revealing my suspicions about Daniel. Tom, if a patient has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, what would be the most obvious physical symptoms? What would a person in that condition really look like? My friend's answer was both revealing and disturbing. Richard, a patient with advanced pancreatic cancer, has severe jaundice. Their skin and eyes turn yellowish. There's a dramatic and constant weight loss, unbearable abdominal pain that requires morphine, and extreme fatigue that barely allows them to walk. It's impossible to hide these symptoms, they're too obvious. As I listened, I vividly remembered the last time I saw Daniel, just 2 weeks ago for his 32nd birthday. He had arrived at our house, riding his sports motorcycle, wearing a tight t-shirt that showed off his athletic build, and he had eaten 3 slices of the chocolate cake Linda made. His skin had a healthy color, his eyes shone with energy, and he had spent the whole afternoon playing football with his cousins in the backyard. Besides, Tom continued, the experimental treatments you mentioned don't exist with those characteristics in California. I know all the oncology protocols in the country, and what you're describing sounds more like a medical scam than a legitimate procedure. If you want, I can check if this Dr. Evans you mentioned really exists at University General. I asked him to do it, although a part of me already knew the answer. While I waited for Tom's confirmation, I decided to take an action that would completely change the course of events. I called the bank where I had my savings and asked them to prepare the transfer of $50,000, but I also requested a detailed record of the transaction, including the date, exact time, and the receiving account number. Why do you need that level of documentation, Mr. Miller? The bank manager asked. It's a considerable amount. Personal reasons, I replied simply. But inside, I was already preparing what would be my future strategy. If Daniel was being honest, that documentation would be irrelevant. If he was lying, it would be the evidence I would need to teach him the most important lesson of his life. That afternoon, Tom called me with information that confirmed my worst fears. Richard, I've checked with 5 colleagues at University General Hospital, and there is no Dr. Michael Evans in the oncology department. In fact, there's no record of that name in the entire hospital. Also, I checked with the clinic in California about the experimental treatments you mentioned, and they confirmed they have no protocol with those characteristics or costs. I hung up the phone feeling a mix of deep disappointment and steely determination. My son, the person I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, was lying to me about having terminal cancer to steal my life savings. But instead of confronting him immediately, I decided to play a much more complex game of chess. That night at dinner, Linda said to me, Richard, I've been thinking, we should go with Daniel to the hospital when he gets his first treatment. As his parents, we have the right to be there, don't you think? Her suggestion was perfect for my plan. You're right, Linda. I'll call Daniel tomorrow to coordinate our visit. I want to personally meet this doctor, Evans, and understand exactly what the procedure involves. The next day, I dialed Daniel's number with an award-winning performance. Son, your mother and I have decided that we want to be with you on your first day of treatment. I know you prefer to handle this alone, but we're your parents, and we need to be there for you during this difficult time. Daniel's response was immediate and nervous. Dad, I really appreciate it, but the doctors said the treatment is very delicate and they don't allow family visits on the first day. Besides, they're going to sedate me completely and I won't even be conscious. It would be better if you came next week. I understand, son, I said with a sympathetic voice, although inside I was taking mental notes of every excuse. But at least let me drive you to the hospital that day. I wouldn't feel right knowing you're going alone to something so important. It's not necessary, Dad. My friend Chris is going to take me. We've already arranged everything. Every answer from Daniel confirmed my suspicions, but I maintained my paternal and understanding tone. All right, son. I respect your decision. Just promise me you'll keep us updated on everything. And please share Dr. Evans' direct number with us for emergencies. There was a long pause before he answered. Sure, Dad. I'll text you all the information tonight. Of course, that text never arrived. When I called him the next day to ask about the information, Daniel told me there had been technical problems with the hospital system and that he would send everything very soon. In the meantime, I proceeded with the bank transfer as planned. On Friday morning, Daniel came to our house to pick up the money. What I saw shocked me deeply. He arrived riding his motorcycle at high speed, wearing new sportswear, and his physical appearance was that of a healthy, athletic young man. There was no sign of jaundice, weight loss, or any symptom that Tom had described as inevitable in a terminal patient. "Thanks, Dad," he said as he received the bank check. "This is going to save my life." His eyes were dry, tearless, and his hug felt mechanical, calculated. "You're welcome, son," I replied, hugging him with the same intensity I always had, but observing every detail of his behavior. "Just promise me you're going to fight with all your strength. Your mother and I couldn't live without you." After he left, Linda found me sitting silently in my study. "Are you okay, Richard? You look strange." "I'm just worried about Daniel," I said, which was completely true, though not for the reasons she thought. I was worried about what I had discovered about my son's character, and about the lesson I would have to teach him very soon. That night, as I reviewed the bank documents one more time, I made a definitive decision. I would give Daniel enough rope to hang himself. I would be patient. I would watch his every move, and when the time was right, I would teach him a lesson he would remember for the rest of his life. The following Monday, according to Daniel, was the day of his first experimental treatment. I decided to test him in a way he would never suspect. At 8 inches the morning, I sent him a text message. "Son, your mother made your favorite lentil soup and some homemade cookies. Can we stop by the hospital at noon to drop them off? I know you said we couldn't stay, but at least we want you to have something homemade during your recovery." The reply came 15 minutes later. "Dad, that's so thoughtful, but the doctors changed the procedure time to very early this morning, and they're going to keep me sedated until tomorrow. Better save the food for when I get home the day after tomorrow. I love you both so much." Perfect. Daniel had just given me exactly the information I needed for my next move. If he was really in treatment, he wouldn't be able to answer texts so quickly or so coherently. A patient under medical sedation would be unable to use their phone. That same morning, after Linda left for her job as a coordinator at the public library, I took my car and drove to University General Hospital. I wasn't going to look for Daniel directly, but to definitively confirm what I already suspected. My plan was simple but effective. I would present myself as the worried father who wanted to leave a gift for his sick son. Upon arriving at the hospital, I went straight to the information desk. "Good morning," I said to the receptionist, an older woman in her 50s with a kind smile. "My name is Richard Miller. My son, Daniel Miller, is receiving oncology treatment today, and I wanted to leave this for him." I took out a bag with the cookies that Linda had actually made the night before, acting like the devoted father anyone would expect to see in that situation. The receptionist checked her computer system carefully. Several minutes passed as she checked different databases. "Mr. Miller, I've checked all our oncology patient records, both inpatient and outpatient, and I can't find any Daniel Miller. Are you sure the treatment is at this hospital?" "Completely sure," I replied, maintaining my expression of genuine confusion. "His doctor is Michael Evans. Could you please check with the oncology department?" After another exhaustive search, the receptionist confirmed what I already knew. "Sir, we don't have any doctor with that name in our oncology department." "It's possible you've confused the hospital or the doctor's name." I acted as any bewildered father would. "There must be some mistake. Let me call my son to clarify this." I dialed Daniel's number in front of the receptionist, but of course, he didn't answer. How strange. He's not picking up. He must be in the procedure. "Mr. Miller," the receptionist said with an understanding tone, "if you'd like, I can connect you with the oncology supervisor to help you locate your son. Sometimes there are administrative mix-ups." "That would be very kind of you," I replied, though I knew perfectly well they wouldn't find anything. 10 minutes later, the department supervisor, a doctor named Carmen Davis, confirmed categorically that Daniel had never been a patient in her department. "Mr. Miller, we keep very precise records of all our patients. If your son had been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer, he would definitely be in our system. Furthermore, we have no Dr. Evans on our staff." I thanked her for her time and left the hospital with a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because my son did not have terminal cancer, but deep disappointment because he had lied to me in the cruelest way possible. He had used a parent's most primitive fear, losing their child, to emotionally manipulate me and steal my savings. On the way home, I decided to check a hunch I'd had. Instead of driving straight back, I took a detour past the BMW dealership, where Daniel had always dreamed of buying a sports car. To my surprise, but not to my shock, I saw his motorcycle parked in the display lot. I parked discreetly across the street and watched. A few minutes later, I saw Daniel walk out of the dealership accompanied by a salesman, both of them smiling broadly. They were looking at a black BMW 3 Series sports car that cost exactly $45,000, according to the sign on the windshield. My son, who was supposedly sedated in a hospital receiving treatment for terminal cancer, was buying a luxury car with the money he had obtained through a ruthless lie. I watched him for 20 minutes as he completed the purchase paperwork, acting like any successful young man who had just received an unexpected bonus. When he finally got into his new BMW and drove away, I remained sitting in my car for several more minutes, processing the full magnitude of what I had just witnessed. It wasn't just the stolen money that hurt me, although $50,000 represented the savings of a lifetime of honest work. It was the fact that my own son had deliberately calculated to use my fatherly love as a weapon against me. That night, when I got home, Linda greeted me anxiously. "How is Daniel? Were you able to talk to the doctors?" I lied to her, something I had rarely done in our 38 years of marriage. "The procedures were delayed. We can visit him tomorrow." I wasn't ready to break Linda's heart with the truth. First, I needed to decide exactly how I would handle this situation. During dinner, my phone rang. It was Daniel, calling from his new BMW while driving who knows where with the money he had stolen. "Dad, how are you? Today's treatment was really tough, but the doctors say I responded well. I'm very weak and my whole body aches, but I'm hopeful this procedure will work." His performance was perfect. If it hadn't been for my investigation, I would have believed every word. His voice sounded genuinely tired, and he even added some convincing moans of pain during the conversation. "I'm glad to hear that, son," I replied with the same paternal performance he expected. "Do you need us to come take care of you tomorrow?" "No, Dad. The side effects are really strong and I'd rather rest alone. But thank you so much for asking. Your support means everything to me during these difficult times." After hanging up, I stayed up late, carefully planning my next moves. Daniel thought he was smarter than his old father, but he was about to find out that 40 years of experience in civil engineering had taught me to build strategies as solid as the bridges I designed. My son had chosen to play a dangerous game with me, using the most ruthless lie possible. Now, it was my turn to teach him that some lessons in life are learned the hard way, and that underestimating your father can be the costliest mistake you ever make. The next few days were a masterpiece of mutual acting. Daniel continued to send me detailed messages about his supposed recovery, describing side effects from the treatment that he had carefully researched on the internet. I responded with the concern and affection any father would show, while secretly documenting every one of his lies. On Thursday afternoon, I decided to make my boldest move yet. I sent Daniel a message. "Son, your mother is very distressed because we haven't been able to see you since the treatment began. We've decided to pay a surprise visit to the hospital tomorrow afternoon, just to see you for a moment and make sure you're okay. You don't have to say anything to the doctors. We just want to see you with our own eyes." The reply took almost an hour to arrive, which was revealing in itself. "Dad, I completely understand your concern, but I have very complicated medical tests scheduled all day tomorrow. The doctors have been very clear about not allowing visitors during these diagnostic tests. Could we leave it for Monday of next week?" "Of course, son," I replied. "Your health is the most important thing. But at least tell me what room you're in, so we can send flowers or something to make you feel better." Another long pause. "I'm in room 312 of the North Wing. But honestly, I'd rather you not send anything because the doctors said I need a completely sterile environment during this phase of treatment. Any external element could compromise my recovery." Perfect. Daniel had just given me the exact information I needed to execute the next phase of my plan. On Friday morning, after Linda left for work, I drove back to University General Hospital. This time, my mission was different and much more specific. I went straight to the information desk and asked to speak with the same receptionist who had helped me before. "Excuse me, I'm Richard Miller. I came a few days ago asking about my son Daniel. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I think maybe there was a mix-up with the names or the paperwork." "Of course, Mr. Miller. How can I help you?" "My son told me he's in room 312 of the North Wing. Could you please check who is registered in that room?" The receptionist checked her system. "Room 312 is occupied by Mrs. Margaret Anderson, an 83-year-old patient who was admitted for hip surgery 3 days ago. There is no young male patient in that room, nor has there been one in the last 2 weeks. Would it be possible to check all the rooms in the North Wing for young oncology patients?" I asked, maintaining my act of a confused father. After an exhaustive search, the answer was categorical. There were no patients matching Daniel's description in the entire oncology department of the hospital. Moreover, the records showed that there had been no admissions of patients with pancreatic cancer in the last 4 weeks. After thanking the receptionist again, I made a decision that would mark the definitive turning point in this situation. Instead of going straight home, I decided to make a strategic stop at a place I knew would give me valuable information about Daniel's real activities. I drove to Gold's Gym, where Daniel had been a member for the last 3 years. If he really had terminal cancer and was undergoing aggressive treatment, it would be impossible for him to maintain his usual exercise routine. However, if he was lying, he would probably continue with his normal activities without thinking about the contradiction. "Good afternoon," I said to the gym receptionist, a young man named Chris who knew Daniel well. "I'm Daniel Miller's father. I wanted to ask if my son has been to the gym in the last few days. He's going through a complicated medical issue, and I wanted to make sure he's not overexerting himself physically." Chris smiled broadly. "Sure. I know Daniel. In fact, he's been coming more frequently than ever. He's been here every day this week, and yesterday he completed an intensive 2-hour workout. He told me he was feeling better than ever, and had decided to get in the best physical shape of his life." Chris's information definitively confirmed what I already knew, but it also gave me an additional detail I hadn't anticipated. "Did he mention anything specific about why he felt so motivated to work out?" "Yes, actually," Chris replied. "He told me he had a recent financial windfall and wanted to celebrate by getting in shape to impress a new girl he'd met. He even invited me to see his new BMW he bought this week." There it was. My son had not only stolen from me with a ruthless lie, but he was actively celebrating his success while I suffered, believing he was dying. The cruelty of his deception surpassed anything I had imagined possible. That night, when I got home, Linda was waiting for me with an anxious expression that broke my heart. "Richard, I've been thinking about Daniel all day. Do you think we should get a second medical opinion? $50,000 seems like a lot of money for a treatment, even an experimental one." For the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered telling Linda the whole truth, but seeing her worried face, I decided to wait a little longer. First, I wanted to make sure I had all the necessary evidence to prove to her that it wasn't a product of my imagination or paternal paranoia. "Linda, I've been investigating discreetly, and I think there are some inconsistencies in Daniel's story," I said carefully. "I don't want to alarm you, but tomorrow I'm going to do some additional checks." "What kind of inconsistencies?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Medical details that don't match what Tom explained to me. It could just be my confusion, but as an engineer, you know I always double-check any important information." Linda nodded, though I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to consider possibilities she preferred not to face. That night, while she slept, I stayed awake carefully planning the next steps. Daniel had made the mistake of underestimating me, believing that a loving father would be easy to manipulate. What he didn't understand was that precisely because I loved him so much, I was not going to let him continue down a path that would completely destroy his character and his future. My son had chosen to make me his victim, but he was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong opponent. The next few days would determine if Daniel would be able to learn the most important lesson of his life, or if he would condemn himself to forever lose the respect and love of his family. The silent war between father and son was about to reach its decisive moment, and only one of us would emerge from this situation with our dignity intact. On Saturday morning, while having breakfast with Linda, I received a message from Daniel that almost made me spit out my coffee. "Dad, I have wonderful news. The doctors reviewed my latest tests, and they say I'm responding better than expected to the treatment. There's a real chance I could beat this completely. I wanted you to be the first to know, because I know how much you've suffered because of my illness." Linda, who was reading the message over my shoulder, began to cry with joy. "Richard, it's a miracle. Our son is going to be cured," she exclaimed, hugging me with a happiness that tore my soul apart, knowing the truth she was still unaware of. "It's incredible," I managed to reply, fighting the rage I felt towards Daniel for manipulating his mother's emotions like this. That same day, I decided to execute a strategy that would definitively reveal the full extent of my son's deceit. I knew that Daniel was active on his social media, particularly Instagram, where he used to share aspects of his social life. If he was really sick and undergoing treatment, his posts would reflect that reality. If he was lying, he would inevitably betray himself. I wasn't a frequent social media user, but during my years in engineering, I had learned that the most valuable information is always available if you know where to look. I asked my neighbor Julian Davis for help, a man my age who worked in IT and understood these modern technologies. "Julian, I need your help to check my son's Instagram profile. There are some family situations I need to verify," I explained without going into compromising details. What we discovered in the next 30 minutes surpassed even my worst expectations. Daniel's profile showed a sequence of posts from the last 10 days that perfectly documented his real activities while he was lying to me about dying in a hospital. There were pictures of him in elegant restaurants, clearly enjoying expensive meals. A particularly painful image showed him toasting with champagne in a luxury bar, with the caption, "Celebrating that sometimes life surprises you with unexpected gifts." The date of that post coincided exactly with the day he had supposedly started his chemotherapy treatment. But the image that struck me the most was a selfie taken from inside his new BMW, with the caption, "New car, new life." Sometimes you have to take risks to get what you really want. The comments from his friends revealed even more. "Where did you get the money for that BMW so soon?" To which Daniel had replied, "Let's just say my old man finally opened his wallet." Julian, who had been watching my expression as we reviewed the posts, finally asked, "Richard, is everything all right? You seem very upset." "My son told me he had terminal cancer and needed $50,000 for treatment," I confessed. "I gave him all my savings, and according to these photos, he's spending it on luxuries while making me believe he's dying." The look of shock on Julian's face perfectly mirrored what I had felt upon discovering the betrayal. "Richard, this is terrible. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to teach him a lesson he will never forget," I replied with a determination that surprised even my neighbor. That afternoon, while Linda was visiting her sister, I took several screenshots of Daniel's most incriminating posts. I also printed the bank records showing the $50,000 transfer and prepared a complete file of evidence that included the hospital's confirmations about the non-existence of Dr. Evans. But my most revealing discovery came that night, when I decided to do one last check on Daniel's social media. He had posted a new photo just 2 hours earlier. He was at an exclusive nightclub in downtown Chicago, surrounded by friends, clearly drunk and celebrating. The caption read, "Life is too short not to enjoy it to the fullest. Thanks, Dad, for making this possible," followed by heart and laughing emojis. The cruelty of that post hit me like a punch. Not only was he celebrating stealing my savings, but he had the audacity to thank me publicly, knowing that I believed I was helping him save his life. At that moment, I made a definitive decision. I would not confront Daniel immediately. Instead, I would allow him to continue digging his own social and moral grave until he had no possible escape. I would begin to systematically document every lie, every contradiction, and every moment of his celebration at my expense. On Sunday morning, Daniel called me with his most elaborate performance to date. "Dad, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done for me. Last night I had a very deep conversation with myself about life and death, and I realized how lucky I am to have a father like you. When I get through this, I'm going to be a completely different son. I promise you." "I'm glad to hear that, Daniel," I replied with a calmness that he interpreted as paternal emotion. "I just want you to focus on getting better. How are you feeling physically? Weak but hopeful? The doctors say next week will be crucial. They're going to do more tests to determine if the treatment is working as they hope." As he spoke, I could hear background music and other people's voices. My son was calling me from what was clearly a social gathering, pretending to be in medical recovery. "Son, I hear voices in the background. Are there other patients there with you?" A pause. "Yes, Dad. There are other young patients in my wing of the hospital. We've become friends and we support each other. It's comforting not to be alone in this." Every word that came out of his mouth was a calculated lie, specifically designed to manipulate my emotions. But now, instead of pain, I felt a cold, methodical determination. After hanging up, I sat at my desk and began to meticulously plan what would be the most important confrontation of my life as a father. Daniel had chosen to make me his victim by using the most sacred love that exists, that of a father for his son, as a weapon against me. But my son was about to discover that he had gravely underestimated his opponent. The next few days would determine whether it was possible to save him from himself, or if he had crossed a line from which there would be no possible return. Over the next week, I developed a plan that required surgical patience and absolute precision. As an engineer, I had learned that the strongest structures are built on perfectly calculated foundations, and the lesson I would teach Daniel needed those same unshakable fundamentals. My first step was to discreetly contact several members of our extended family. Not to reveal the truth immediately, but to organize something Daniel would never suspect, a family gathering of support and celebration for his supposed medical improvement. I called my sister Helen Miller, who lived in California and had always had a special relationship with Daniel. Helen, I have some news about Daniel that I wanted to share with you personally. He's been going through a serious health crisis, but it seems like he's getting better. I'd like to organize a family get-together to show him our support. Helen, as I expected, was immediately concerned and willing to help. Richard, why didn't you tell me anything sooner? Of course, we'll be there. What kind of health crisis? I'd rather explain it when we see each other in person. I'm organizing a family lunch for next Sunday. Could you and Frank come with the kids? I also contacted my brother-in-law, Michael Reed, Linda's brother, and several close cousins. I explained that Daniel had been sick but was recovering and that we wanted to have a family celebration to lift his spirits. No one questioned the details because they trusted my judgment as the head of the family. While organizing this gathering, I continued to meticulously document Daniel's real activities through his social media. His posts had become increasingly extravagant, photos in luxury spas, 5-star restaurants, and he had even booked a trip to Miami for the following month. One particularly revealing post showed Daniel at an exclusive jewelry store trying on a Rolex watch that cost over $20,000. The comment read, "When life gives you lemons, buy a Rolex." His friends commented, asking where he had suddenly gotten so much money, and he replied with winking emojis and comments like, "A generous father is a blessing." But my most shocking discovery came on Wednesday night. While reviewing his online activities, I found that Daniel had created a new Instagram account under a fake name, Daniel Lives Life 2024. On this secret account, he had completely documented his fraud. There were photos of him counting stacks of cash with the caption, "Never underestimate the power of a good performance." One image showed him toasting with friends in his new BMW, with the text, "My old man bought the whole cancer story, $50,000 for a few fake tears. Not bad." The cruelest photograph was a selfie taken at the very moment he had called me pretending to be weak in the hospital. The image clearly showed him on the terrace of a luxury hotel, laughing, with the caption, "Calling Dad to keep the charade alive, Oscar for Best Dramatic Actor." That night, after Linda had gone to bed, I printed all this evidence and organized it chronologically. I had complete photographic documentation that showed exactly where Daniel had been at every moment he had lied to me about being in medical treatment. On Thursday morning, I executed the next phase of my strategy. I called Daniel and said, "Son, we've organized a family gathering for Sunday. The whole family wants to see you and celebrate your improvement. Helen and Frank are coming from California, and Michael is bringing his whole family. We want to have a special meal in your honor." Daniel's response was immediate and nervous. "Dad, I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm still very weak, and I don't want to worry the family by having them see me in this condition." "That's precisely why we want to see you," I insisted. "The family needs to confirm with their own eyes that you're getting better. Besides, Doctor, Evans says that positive social interaction is an important part of your recovery, right?" A long pause. Yes, he did say that." Okay, Dad. If you think it's important for my recovery, I'll be there." "Perfect. Lunch will be at 2 in the afternoon. And Daniel, I've also invited Tom, my doctor friend, because he wants to meet you and talk to you about your experience. He says he can learn a lot from your case to help other patients." This time, the pause was even longer. "Is it really necessary for a doctor to come? I'd rather keep my medical situation private. Tom is family's son. Besides, he insisted on coming when he heard about your illness. It would be rude not to allow it, especially considering everything he's done to help me understand your condition." Daniel had no choice but to agree, although I could detect the growing nervousness in his voice. Over the next 3 days, I finalized the preparations for what would be the definitive moment of truth. I prepared copies of all the evidence I had gathered, photographs from his social media, bank records, hospital confirmations about the non-existence of Dr. Evans, and testimonies from the gym about his intensive physical activities. I also took the time to write a detailed letter, explaining each step of my investigation, the exact dates of each lie, and the corresponding evidence. This letter would serve as a guide during the confrontation, ensuring I didn't miss any crucial details. On Saturday night, as I mentally reviewed my strategy for the next day, I received one last message from Daniel that definitively solidified my resolve. "Dad, tomorrow might be emotionally difficult for me. Seeing the whole family gathered makes me think about how fragile life is and how close I've been to losing everything. Thank you for organizing this. After tomorrow, I think I'll be able to truly start living again." The irony of his words was perfect. After tomorrow, indeed, everything would change for Daniel. But not in the way he expected. My son was about to discover that actions have consequences, and that lying to your father using the most primitive fear of any parent, losing their child, had a price that until that moment he had not calculated. The Sunday arrived with a clear sky that contrasted dramatically with the storm about to break in my home. At 11 in the morning, I began the final preparations for what would be the most crucial moment in my relationship with Daniel. Linda had prepared a special meal, not suspecting that she would be a witness to a revelation that would forever change our perception of our son. "Richard, I'm so excited that Daniel is recovering," she said as she arranged the flowers she had bought especially for the occasion. "This family reunion will be perfect to lift his spirits." "It will be perfect," I agreed, though for completely different reasons than she imagined. At 1:30, the guests began to arrive. Helen and Frank arrived first from California, followed by Michael and his family. They all asked about Daniel with genuine concern, as they only knew he had been sick but was recovering. Tom arrived promptly at 1:45, carrying a briefcase with authentic medical material we had agreed to use as part of the confrontation. "Richard, are you sure you want to do it this way?" he asked me discreetly. "Completely sure. My son needs to learn this lesson in the most impactful way possible, or he will never truly change." At 2 o'clock, Daniel arrived driving his new BMW. The contrast was immediately apparent to anyone who knew the truth. He looked completely healthy, tanned from his recent beach getaways, and clearly in excellent physical condition. He was wearing new, expensive clothes, and a watch I recognized as one I had seen in his secret Instagram photos. "Daniel!" exclaimed Helen, running to hug him. "How are you feeling? Your father told us you've been very sick." Daniel's performance began immediately. "Aunt Helen, it's been very difficult, but I'm fighting. The doctors say I'm responding well to the treatment, although I still have very tough days." For the next 30 minutes, I watched my son blatantly lie to every member of the family. He told them elaborate stories about non-existent chemotherapy sessions, described side effects he had researched on the internet, and even feigned moments of weakness when he thought no one was watching him too closely. But I was watching every detail. I noticed how he forgot to act when he was engaged in normal conversations, how his fatigue magically disappeared when he talked about topics that interested him, and how he carefully avoided any specific questions about his medical treatment. At 3 in the afternoon, after the main meal, I stood up and gently tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. "Family, I want to thank you for coming today to support Daniel in this very important moment of his life." All conversations ceased, and all eyes turned to me. Daniel was smiling confidently, probably expecting an emotional speech about his bravery in the face of illness. "Daniel," I continued, looking directly at him, "for the past 3 weeks, you have proven to be a master of deception. You have managed to convince your family that you were dying of cancer, you have fabricated elaborate medical stories, and you have even created fictional characters like Dr. Michael Evans." The smile immediately vanished from Daniel's face. The color drained from his skin, and I could see panic beginning to set in his eyes. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he stammered, but his voice had already lost all its previous confidence. "I'm talking about the most elaborate and cruel lie I have ever witnessed," I replied in a firm voice. I pulled out the first folder of evidence I had prepared. "University General Hospital officially confirms that you have never been their patient. There is no record of your name in any department, and there is definitely no Dr. Evans on their medical staff." The silence in the dining room was absolute. Helen had her hand over her mouth. Michael looked incredulously between Daniel and me, and Linda had begun to turn pale as she processed the implications of my words. "But this is just the beginning," I continued, pulling out the printouts from his social media. "While you were telling us you were weak and in treatment, you were publicly documenting how you spent the $50,000 you stole from my savings." I began to show the photographs one by one. Daniel toasting with champagne on the day of his supposed first treatment, buying the BMW with his medical treatment money, celebrating in exclusive nightclubs while pretending to be sedated in the hospital. "This photograph," I said, showing the most incriminating one, "was taken at the exact moment you called me crying to tell me how weak you felt after chemotherapy. As you can see, you were on the terrace of a 5-star hotel, laughing while you lied to me over the phone." Daniel tried to interrupt. "Dad, can I explain all this? Things are not what they seem." "Oh, I think they are exactly what they seem," I retorted. "But let me show you something else." I pulled out the printouts from his secret Instagram account. "Your account, Daniel Lives Life 2024, completely documents your fraud. Here you describe yourself counting the money you stole. Here you boast that your old man bought the whole cancer story. And here you celebrate getting $50,000 for a few fake tears. The family's reaction was immediate and devastating. Helen began to cry, not with joy as she had all week, but with horror at what she was hearing. Michael stood up abruptly, clearly shocked by the magnitude of the deceit, but the most heart-wrenching reaction was Linda's. My wife, who had cried with worry for weeks, believing she might lose her only son, was now crying in a completely different way as she understood that she had been manipulated using her deepest maternal love. "Daniel," Linda said with a broken voice, "how could you do this to us? How could you use our love for you in this way?" Daniel, finally cornered with no possible escape, completely changed his strategy. The mask of the sick and grateful son disappeared entirely, replaced by a defensive and even aggressive attitude. "You know what? I don't regret anything," he declared with a coldness that chilled the blood. "That money was mine by right. As the only child, I would have inherited it eventually anyway. I just sped up the process." His words fell upon the family like bombs. The total absence of remorse, the calculated justification of his fraud, and his dismissive attitude towards the suffering he had caused revealed a level of narcissism that none of us had suspected. Tom, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. "Daniel, as an oncologist, I have seen real patients battling pancreatic cancer. I have seen entire families destroyed by this disease. What you have done is not just financial fraud. It is a desecration of the most genuine experience of suffering that exists." At that moment, I knew my son had crossed a line from which there would be no possible return. The atmosphere in the dining room had become so tense you could cut it with a knife. Daniel, seeing himself completely exposed, had decided to abandon any pretense of remorse and show his true character. What emerged was a version of my son I had never seen before, or perhaps one I had chosen to ignore for years. Besides, Daniel continued with a cynical smile that was completely unknown to me. "Don't you find it ironic that you're all so outraged? Dad, you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on me my whole life. What's the difference if I take 50,000 more? In the end, all that money was going to be mine eventually." Helen stood up sharply, her face reflecting a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Daniel, the difference is that your parents have suffered, believing you were going to die. Your mother hasn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Do you really not understand the cruelty of what you've done?" "The cruelty," Daniel replied with a tone that chilled my blood, "would be letting my parents cling to their money while I have to wait decades to enjoy life. I'm 32, not 65. This is my time to live fully." Linda, who had been crying silently, finally found her voice. "Son, what did we do wrong? Where did we fail as parents for you to be able to do something like this?" Daniel's answer was the most devastating blow of all. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom. You just raised someone smarter than you, someone who isn't willing to settle for crumbs when he can take the whole cake." At that moment, I understood that I wasn't seeing my son going through a temporary character crisis. I was seeing the true personality that had been growing silently for years, hidden behind the mask of the loving and grateful son. "Daniel," I said with a calmness that surprised even myself. "For the past 3 weeks while planning this confrontation, I constantly wondered if there was any chance you would show genuine remorse when you were exposed. I hoped, even after all the evidence, that when you were faced with the truth, you would show at least a hint of the son I thought I had raised." I approached him, looking directly into his eyes. "But what you are showing here, in front of your entire family, is that there is nothing left to save. There is no remorse, no shame, no acknowledgement of the harm you have caused. There is only a calculating narcissist who sees his family as resources to be exploited." "Dad," Daniel replied with a smile that was completely alien to me, "at least I'm honest about who I am. Isn't that what you always taught me? To be authentic?" "I taught you to be honest, not a sociopath," I retorted. "But since you prefer brutal honesty, allow me to be completely honest with you about the consequences of your actions." I pulled out the last set of documents I had prepared, legal papers I had been organizing over the past week. These are copies of a formal complaint for family fraud that I filed with the authorities last Friday. It includes all the evidence you've just seen, plus detailed bank statements and witness declarations. Daniel's smile faltered for the first time since the confrontation began. "Dad, you can't be serious." "Completely serious," I confirmed. "But that's not all. I have also initiated the legal process to completely amend my will. You are no longer listed as an heir to any of my properties, investments, or assets. Helen and Frank have agreed to be the alternate beneficiaries of my entire estate." Michael, who had remained quiet for most of the confrontation, finally intervened. Richard, as a lawyer, I must ask you, are you sure you want to go this far? These are irreversible decisions. Michael, for 40 years as an engineer, I have learned that when a structure is fundamentally compromised, trying to repair it only prolongs the inevitable collapse. It is safer to demolish it completely and rebuild from scratch. The architectural analogy was perfect to describe my relationship with Daniel. The foundations of trust, mutual respect, and genuine love had been completely undermined by his actions. There was no possible repair. Furthermore, I continued, I have contacted the manager of your apartment. Since I am the holder of the lease and the one who pays the mortgage, the eviction process will begin tomorrow morning. You have 72 hours to collect your personal belongings. For the first time since the confrontation had begun, I saw genuine panic in Daniel's eyes. Until that moment, he had assumed my threats were emotional theater designed to temporarily scare him. Now he was beginning to realize that every word I had said was completely literal. "Dad, wait," he stammered, and for a moment it seemed he was finally going to show some kind of remorse. "We can fix this. I can return the money. I can change." "Daniel," I replied with a deep sadness but firm determination, "you had 3 full weeks to show spontaneous remorse. Throughout that time you chose to continue lying, celebrating your success, and even publicly mocking my gullibility. The time for genuine repentance has passed." Tom, who had observed the entire confrontation with a professional expression, finally spoke again. "Daniel, as a doctor I have seen many pathologies, but few as devastating as the complete absence of empathy. What you have demonstrated today is not a youthful error in judgment. It is a fundamental lack of basic human connection." The family remained in absolute silence as the full implications of the situation settled in. Helen was crying silently, Frank had his head in his hands, and Linda had stopped crying, replacing the tears with a cold expression of resolve that I recognized as identical to my own. "Daniel," Linda said finally, her voice firm but broken, "for 32 years I believed I had given birth to the most wonderful son in the world. Today I discover that I actually raised a stranger who used my love as a weapon against me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that." At that moment, I knew the transformation was complete. My son had chosen his path, and we had chosen ours. The reality of his consequences was finally starting to penetrate Daniel's arrogance. Over the next few minutes, I witnessed something I had never seen in my son. Genuine panic at the loss of his financial and social comfort. "Dad, Mom, please," he began with a trembling voice, completely abandoning the defiant attitude he had maintained throughout the confrontation. "I understand you're angry, but this can be fixed. I'll sell the BMW, I'll return all the money, and I'll seek psychological help. I just need one more chance." But his plea came too late and sounded too calculated. After he had revealed his true character so completely, his words of repentance sounded like just another manipulation, designed to avoid the consequences of his actions. "Daniel," I replied firmly, "for the past 3 weeks, you had multiple opportunities to show spontaneous remorse. Every time we spoke on the phone, every time you lied to me about your supposed treatment, every time you posted pictures celebrating your fraud, you had the option to stop this charade and confess the truth." Helen, who had been crying silently, approached Daniel with an expression of deep disappointment. "Daniel, I was the one who took care of you when your parents were working. I changed your diapers. I took you to your first doctor's appointment. I celebrated every one of your academic achievements. How could you sit here, look me in the eye, and lie to me about dying?" "Aunt Helen, I didn't want to involve the whole family," Daniel stammered. "This was between my father and me." "It was between you and your father until you decided to turn your lie into a family performance," Fernando burst out, who had remained quiet for most of the confrontation. "We traveled from California, we rearranged our lives, we cried for you for weeks. You are a ruthless manipulator." Michael, using his legal expertise, decided to intervene with practical information. "Daniel, as a lawyer, I must explain the real implications of what your father has initiated. The family fraud complaint can result in criminal charges, not just civil ones. You are facing the possibility of real prison time, not just the loss of inheritance." For the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine terror in Daniel's eyes. "Prison? Dad, you can't be serious about sending your own son to jail." "Daniel," I said with a calm I had developed during my decades of engineering, where emotional decisions could result in structural collapses. "When you build a bridge, every component must be absolutely reliable. If you discover that a fundamental element is compromised, you can't just hope it fixes itself. You must replace it completely to protect the integrity of the entire structure." "But I'm your son, not an engineering component," he protested desperately. "Exactly," I replied. "You are my son, which makes your betrayal infinitely more painful than any structural failure I have faced professionally. A faulty bridge can kill strangers, but you have deliberately destroyed the people who love you most." Tom, who had observed the entire interaction with professional interest, added his medical perspective. "Daniel, in medicine, when a treatment doesn't work, continuing it only causes more harm to the patient. Your father has tried for years to treat you with love, support, and financial resources, hoping you would become an honorable man. Clearly, that treatment has failed." At that moment, I pulled out the last document I had prepared, an official letter from St. Michael's Children's Hospital, where I had arranged something that would represent the culmination of the lesson I wanted to teach Daniel. "Son," I said, holding up the paper, "I want to offer you one last chance for redemption, although I sincerely doubt you will take it. I have spoken with the administration of St. Michael's Hospital, which has a pediatric oncology unit, where they treat real children with real cancer." Daniel looked at me with confusion, clearly not understanding where I was going with this. "They have agreed to let you work as an unpaid volunteer for 2 full years. You will clean rooms, help with basic tasks, and most importantly, you will see firsthand what it truly means to fight against cancer. You will see 5-year-old children fighting battles you only pretended to have." "Volunteer work?" Daniel asked, as if the words were completely foreign to his vocabulary. "Volunteer work," I confirmed. "No salary, no benefits, no public recognition, just the opportunity to understand the real suffering that you desecrated with your performance. If you complete those 2 years, and if the medical supervisors confirm that you have shown genuine growth as a human being, I will consider dropping the criminal complaint." Michael nodded with professional approval. "That's a generous offer, Daniel. Most parents in Richard's position would simply let you face the full legal consequences without a chance for redemption. But I continued, if you refuse this opportunity, or if you accept it but do not complete it with absolute dedication, I will proceed with all possible legal charges. Furthermore, I will make sure that every potential employer in this country knows exactly what kind of person you are." Linda, who had been silently processing all the information, finally spoke. "Richard, do you really think it's worth giving him even this chance? After everything we've seen today, is there any real possibility that he will change?" "Honestly, no," I admitted. "But as a father, I need to be able to tell myself that I offered him one last chance to redeem himself. If he refuses it or squanders it, at least I will know I did everything I could." Daniel looked around the room, seeing the disappointed faces of every member of his family. For the first time in his life, he had no allies, no one willing to rescue him from the consequences of his actions. "When would I have to start this volunteer work?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Tomorrow morning," I replied without hesitation. "And Daniel, to be perfectly clear, this is not a negotiation. It is your only alternative to prison." The next 6 months were a period of profound transformation for our entire family, though in completely different ways than anyone would have anticipated. Daniel, faced with the reality of his only 2 options, prison or volunteer service in pediatric oncology, reluctantly chose the second alternative. His first day at St. Michael's Hospital was revealing in ways none of us had fully foreseen. Dr. Susan Collins, the head of the pediatric oncology unit, called me that same afternoon to inform me about Daniel's initial behavior. "Mr. Miller," she said in a professional but understanding tone, "your son arrived this morning with a clearly resentful attitude. During the initial orientation, when I explained that he would be cleaning rooms and helping with basic tasks, he asked if there was a more appropriate job for someone with a university education. I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always considered any manual labor to be degrading, a perspective that clearly needed a fundamental revision. How did you handle the situation, doctor? I explained to him that humility is the first requirement for working with sick children, and that if he couldn't find dignity in cleaning the room of a 6-year-old boy battling leukemia, then he had no place in our unit. During the first few weeks, I received regular reports on Daniel's progress. The reports were not encouraging. He frequently arrived late, complained constantly about the assigned tasks, and maintained a calculated emotional distance from the patients and their families. But something began to change during the second month. Dr. Collins called me with a different report. "Mr. Miller, today I observed your son sitting in the hallway during his break, crying. When I asked him what had happened, he told me he had just cleaned the room of Paul, a 7-year-old boy who had lost his battle with a brain tumor during the night." It was the first time in months that I had heard anything about Daniel that suggested a genuine emotional connection with another person. How did he respond when you approached him? I asked. Initially, he tried to hide his tears, but when I told him it was natural to be affected, he admitted he had never seen a young person die. He said Paul had shown him pictures of his dog the week before, talking about all the games he wanted to teach him when he got home. Over the following months, the reports on Daniel began to show a gradual but significant evolution. He stopped arriving late, began to request additional tasks, and most importantly, started to develop genuine relationships with some of the young patients. The definitive turning point came during the 5th month. Dr. Collins asked me to come to the hospital for an important conversation about Daniel's progress. Mr. Miller, she said when I arrived at her office, I want to show you something that I think will surprise you. She led me to a window overlooking the hospital's playground, where I could see Daniel sitting on the floor with a group of small children, reading a storybook. That wasn't assigned as part of his duties, the doctor explained. For the past 3 weeks, he has been coming during his lunch hour to read to the children who are too weak for regular physical activities. I watched my son interacting with those children, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine joy in his face. Not the calculated smile he had perfected to manipulate others, but an expression of authentic satisfaction from doing something meaningful for people who truly needed it. There's something else, the doctor continued. Last week, one of our regular patients, a girl named Sarah who has leukemia, turned 8. Her family couldn't afford a special celebration due to medical costs. Your son organized a small surprise party, paying for everything out of his own pocket. That information hit me deeply. Daniel had spent his own money, something he had never done voluntarily in his entire life, to make a sick little girl happy who owed him nothing. Where did he get the money? I asked, genuinely curious. He's been working extra shifts, cleaning offices at night to earn some extra money. Apparently, he sold his BMW and is living in a very modest apartment near the hospital. Over the next few months, I continued to receive reports on Daniel's transformation. He had started studying different types of childhood cancer, not because it was required, but because he wanted to better understand what his little patient friends were going through. Dr. Collins informed me that Daniel had developed a special relationship with a 10-year-old boy named David, who was battling osteosarcoma. David had lost all hope, she explained. His parents are divorced, his mother works 2 jobs to pay for the treatment, and he had become very withdrawn. But your son has managed to connect with him in an extraordinary way. As the end of Daniel's first year of volunteer service approached, the doctor asked for another meeting. This time she had an unexpected proposal. Mr. Miller, I have observed a genuine transformation in your son over these months. He has shown dedication, empathy, and a personal growth that I honestly did not expect to see. I would like to offer him the opportunity to become the volunteer coordinator of recreational activities for our unit. What would that entail? I asked. He would be responsible for organizing educational and recreational programs for the patients, coordinating with families for special events, and helping with the emotional transition of children receiving difficult diagnoses. It's a job that requires considerable emotional maturity. For the first time in over a year, I seriously considered the possibility that my son had experienced an authentic change of character, not just a performance designed to avoid legal consequences. That night, I made a decision that would mark the next chapter of our father-son relationship. Exactly 18 months after that family confrontation that changed our lives forever, I received a call I never expected to hear. It was Daniel, but his voice sounded completely different from any conversation we had had in recent years. Dad, he said with a humility I recognized as genuine, I know I have no right to ask you this after everything I did, but I would like to see you. There's something important I need to tell you, and I want to do it face to face. Over the previous months, I had maintained indirect contact with Daniel's progress through the medical reports, but we had avoided any direct personal communication. The wound of his betrayal had been too deep to heal quickly, and I needed to see concrete evidence of change before considering any reconciliation. All right, Daniel, I replied after a thoughtful pause. We can meet at the cafe near the hospital on Saturday afternoon. When I arrived at the agreed-upon place, I almost didn't recognize the man waiting for me at a corner table. The Daniel I had confronted 18 months ago had been arrogant, well-dressed in expensive clothes, and projected an attitude of calculated superiority. The man who stood up to greet me was completely different. He wore simple but clean clothes, had lost weight in a healthy way, and most importantly, his eyes showed something I had never seen before, genuine peace with himself. "Dad," he began, when we sat down, "for the last 18 months, I've learned things about myself that I would have never discovered otherwise. I want to start by thanking you for forcing me to face the consequences of my actions, even when I know it must have been painful for you as a father." "Daniel," I replied carefully, "I've followed your medical reports. Dr. Collins has kept me informed about your work at the hospital, but I need to hear from you what has really changed." "Everything," he replied without hesitation. "Dad, for 32 years I lived believing the world owed me something, that because I was your son, because I was born into a comfortable family, I had an automatic right to a comfortable life without genuine effort. The cancer I faked to rob you became a perfect metaphor for who I really was, something destructive that consumed everything around it without giving anything valuable in return." His words showed an introspection he had never demonstrated before. I continued to listen, carefully evaluating whether his reflections were authentic or another elaborate manipulation. "Working with children who are really fighting cancer showed me what true strength means," he continued. "I've seen 6-year-old children face treatments that I couldn't even pretend to endure. I've comforted parents who would give anything, including their own lives, to save their children. And I realized that I had desecrated that sacred love you felt for me." "What specifically made you change?" I asked, wanting to understand the precise moment of his transformation. "It was David," he replied, and for the first time I saw genuine tears in his eyes. The 10-year-old boy Dr. Collins had mentioned. For months, I watched him fight osteosarcoma with a dignity I had never shown in the face of any real difficulty. When he finally lost his battle last month, he asked me to promise him something. Daniel paused, clearly moved by the memory. He asked me to promise that I would live a life worth living, because he no longer could. He told me he had watched how I had arrived at the hospital angry and resentful, but that, over the months, he had seen my attitude change. He said that if he, who was actually dying, could find reasons to smile every day, then I, who had perfect health, had no excuse to waste my life. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This was not the manipulative Daniel I had known for years, but someone who had been genuinely transformed by real experiences of loss and service. "Dad," he continued, "I came to ask for your forgiveness, but not so you would reinstate me into the family or restore my inheritance. I came to thank you for saving me from myself. If you had given in to my manipulation 18 months ago, I would have continued to be an emotional parasite for the rest of my life. What are your plans for the future?" I asked, genuinely curious about his aspirations. "I've decided to study social work, specializing in pediatric oncology. Dr. Collins has offered me a paid position as a program coordinator once I complete my certification. For the first time in my life, I have a purpose that goes beyond my own benefit." For the next 2 hours, we continued to talk about his transformation, his new perspectives on life, and his future plans. Gradually, I began to recognize elements of the son I had always hoped to have, but who had been hidden under layers of narcissism and unearned privilege. When we said goodbye that afternoon, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 18 months earlier. "Daniel," I said as we walked to our respective cars, "your mother and I have discussed the possibility of starting a gradual rebuilding of our family relationship. It won't be automatic, and it will take time to earn our full trust again, but we are willing to try if you continue to demonstrate the genuine growth you have shown." "Dad," he replied with tears in his eyes, "I didn't expect or deserve that opportunity. I promise I won't waste it." 6 months later, as I write this story, Daniel has completed his certification in social work and continues to work at St. Michael's Hospital. He has developed innovative programs to help families facing childhood cancer diagnoses, and his work has been recognized by medical institutions across the country. More importantly, he has learned the most valuable lesson any parent can teach, that a person's true worth is not measured by what they can take from others, but by what they can give to the world. Sometimes, the deepest lessons can only be learned through genuine suffering and direct confrontation with our own failings. As a father, I discovered that true love sometimes requires the courage to let our children face the full consequences of their actions, even when every paternal instinct screams to protect them. In Daniel's case, that difficult decision saved not only his character, but probably his soul. If you liked this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left. Thanks for watching.